Greetings, citizens of GMU and Earth. Welcome to From the Cinema. I am your temporary host for this episode, second semester senior, history major, dance minor, Curtis Eichelberger. Now, if you're a regular follower of this television program, you may be wondering why you see my face.
Aww.
Well, back on Halloween, I won a costume contest put on by Mason Cable Network for my costume. A male version of Charlotte LaBeouf from Princess and the Frog, we'll get to that later, named Charlie LaBeouf. Hopefully a picture appears there. And I subsequently won an appearance on an MCN show of my choosing. And considering my extensive knowledge of all things Disney and my previous and upcoming employment with them, I decided to take over From the Cinema. And here I am. Here we are. Taking over the show that my best friend Roger Dean used to host. Sup, Roger? Money, money, yeah, be jealous. How am I going to capitalize upon this opportunity? How am I going to use this one-time platform to spread this knowledge of Disney with you, the viewers of this program? Reservoir Dogs. No. What I'm going to do is review, compare, and contrast two periods in Disney history, the Disney Renaissance and the Neo-Renaissance, otherwise known as the Disney Revival. This episode will be sprinkled with Disney history, fun facts, and reviews of the movies only within the two periods. So let's get started with some history. So after Walt Disney passed away from lung cancer on December 15th, 1966, and was not frozen... Speaking of Frozen, we'll get to that later. Walt Disney Animation Studios underwent a bit of a trailing period. The movies they were putting out, known as Walt Disney Animated Classics, post-Jungle Book, which came out a year after Walt died, weren't bad movies by any means, but they just weren't up to par with the studio's previous classics. The movies in this period are Aristocats, Robin Hood, Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, The Rescuers, and The Fox and the Hound, in that order. These movies aren't bad by any means, and I recommend watching all of them. But do be warned, if you're gonna watch The Fox and the Hound, it might tear your heart out and eat it like a fox. These films were just not as well received by critics and didn't resonate with audiences like previous films had, the ones released under Walt. But then they hit a new low in 1985. A very big low, The Black Cauldron.
Aww.
Now, I thought The Black Cauldron was good, all things considered, but I understand why it wasn't that successful. And I understand that when you compare it to other Disney films, it doesn't seem like it belongs. It has scarier and more graphic imagery, and it didn't have as much character development or enchantment as previous Disney films. It also didn't help that the movie was the first Disney film to receive a PG rating, and PG was much different in the 80s. Critics and audiences share this consensus of a lacking film. The film has a 55% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it only made $21.3 million against a $44 million budget. It cost Disney a lot of money, and the future of Disney animation did not look good. It has developed a bit of a cult following, and it was well animated. In fact, it was the first film released by Disney to utilize computer animation. But it didn't print receipts, and it caused a lot of problems. The Care Bears movie grossed more money. So it was clear that Disney needed to come back. Disney needed to renew their interest in their animated films, and the public's, or face a possible extinction. Disney was not doing well. Now, their next Walt Disney animated classic was The Great Mouse Detective, which was essentially Sherlock Holmes as mice. And it did better. Great Mouse Detective received an 81% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $38.7 million against a $14 million budget. So it was an improvement from the big screen bomb of The Black Cauldron. The film itself had 3 musical numbers. Black Cauldron didn't have any. And the musical numbers were good. The plot was well done, and Vincent Price did a great job as the villain, Professor Ratigan. So the movie was enough to make Disney and the public think, not done yet. And while Great Mouse Detective helped encourage Disney a little to change up and revamp their animation department, another film would push them much more. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Roger Rabbit was a collaboration between Disney and Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment, and it brought together multiple universes of cartoon characters. Disney characters were united with Warner Brothers characters and Fleischer Studio characters, and so many others. Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny appeared on the screen at the same time for the first time ever. That's huge. They've essentially been rivals their entire existence. And here they are coming together to help make a film. The film was also a blockbuster, earning $329.8 million against a $58 million budget, and has a 97% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The success of Roger Rabbit in all aspects led to an increased interest in animation from both Disney and the public. And this interest made way for the first success of the first film of the Disney Renaissance, 1989's The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid was a return to form for Disney in many ways, as well as a step forward. In terms of return to form, Disney puts out another princess movie to join Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, and they make it a musical, whereas Great Mouse Detective wasn't so much of a musical as it was a movie with a couple of songs. The movie also involved magic and romance like Disney films of the past. Now, in terms of a step forward, Little Mermaid isn't paced like past Disney princess musicals. The pacing is a little quicker, which contrasts to the older Disney musicals where scenes would last longer and many times it would be visuals over dialogue to drive them. The musical numbers were grander, having more of a modern Broadway feel to them. And the biggest step forward was in terms of the princess protagonist. In contrast to the previous Disney princess films, Ariel behaves much more like a modern teenager would. She has this incredible curiosity, she's not perfect, she questions authority, she has clashing viewpoints with her father and vocalizes them freely, and she's starting to wonder exactly where she belongs. In addition, she's much more of a go-getter. She wants to live on land, and then she wants to win over Eric. Granted, she does kind of make a deal with the devil to do it, but the point is, she goes after what she wants instead of waiting. She's able to find out what she needs to do and what she needs to sacrifice in order to accomplish what she wants. She has determination, and that's a great quality to instill in children's role models. And Jodie Benson voices her in a way that doesn't sound anything like the previous Disney princesses. She has a variety in her voice, and doesn't speak in this high, bright and cheery voice the whole time. While her voice is cheery, it's not over-sweetened, like a cinnamon bun covered with chocolate dipped in Nevada sugar served with soda. Now, the film has very memorable and charming music, and a good score to accompany it. Good character development, and an awesome villain. That's a key ingredient to a good Disney film, is a good villain. She's menacing but delightful. She's funny but serious. And she's got a great song, and a spectacular death. Getting stabbed to death by a pointy ship? I mean, yeah, it's kind of dark and violent, but Disney can get pretty dark when it wants to. Black Cauldron. Now, in terms of the messages of the movie, there are ways to make the movie problematic, like change for your man or a deal with the devil ends just fine. But the main messages they were going for was to go after your dreams instead of waiting for them. You know, like Shia LaBeouf said, don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday, you said tomorrow, so just do it! Make your dreams come true! And the other is to let children be more free to decide who they want to be in life, what they want. You know, to have their own life. Not to give them everything they want, but just not to micromanage them. Little Mermaid has a 92% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it grossed $211.3 million against a $40 million budget. I give the film 8.8 out of 10. It's a good start. So now, the public has taken notice of this return to form and stepped forward in The Little Mermaid, and their interest in animation, particularly Disney, is growing even more. Disney would follow up The Little Mermaid with the second sequel in Walt Disney Animated Classics history, 1990's The Rescuers Down Under. Haven't heard of this movie? Wouldn't be surprised. There are a lot of movies before and after it that overshadow it, and it received a more limited release due to a lack of interest from the public. But it's actually pretty good, and I prefer it to the first Rescuers movie from 1977. The Australian setting is very engaging, there's a great amount of action, the villain is up to par, I believe, and the animation was pretty well done, especially when Cody and Marahute fly. If anything, check that out. It's enchanting and it's chill-inducing. And I will add that the late, great John Candy provides the voice of Wilbur the Albatross, and he's definitely a high for the movie. Now, the plot and overall characterization may be lacking in some places, and it's not a quintessential Disney film. But I feel like it's worth giving a try. I give it 7.3 out of 10. So, Rescuers Down Under was essentially the hang in there while we make some masterpieces movie, because the next film in the Disney Renaissance is one of the best, in my opinion, 1991's Beauty and the Beast. And for this, there we go. Now, where do I begin? Beauty and the Beast is absolutely wonderful. It continues the new tradition of Disney princesses breaking molds, with Belle doing things that women weren't supposed to be doing in that society. She's a bookworm, and the norm for a woman in her town was not to read or have these ideas that she has, which is evident by the town's immense admiration for Gaston, the man who pushes the ideas the most. Everyone thinks she's strange because of her love of books and her desire to have a daring life away from the norm that the town had established. The character development is great, the setting and scenery are great, the animation is stunning. The deep message on the idea of beauty and humanity is presented in a way that can resonate with both children and adults. The movie finds the perfect balance of for children and for adults, and the best Disney movies do that. There's fantastic music, both in terms of song and score, and the titular song never fails to incite chills or even tears amongst its listeners. Now, there are people who cry Stockholm Syndrome on the movie, and while I can understand where they're coming from, here's the thing. Beast doesn't try and convince Belle that her life depends on him. Belle doesn't respond with sympathy when Beast treats her poorly. In fact, she runs away, and she only comes back because she doesn't want Beast to freeze to death. She only responds kindly to the Beast when he begins to show her genuine respect and kindness. Plus, even though Beast has a motive to keep her in the castle, he sets her free. He lets her go so she can be with her father. He lets her go for her happiness and prosperity and family prosperity, and she returns to save him. The relationship between Belle and the Beast is not exactly Stockholm Syndrome. In fact, it's more like Lima Syndrome, or Lima, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, where the captor begins to sympathize with the captive. So, yeah. Plus, Gaston is an incredibly relatable villain. You can probably relate him to somebody in your life. He's incredibly human. He has no powers. He only has a strength, personality, and LeFou. He is a realistic villain that Disney needed to have. The film was incredibly successful both commercially and critically, with a 93% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a gross of $425 million against a $25 million budget. In addition, it was the first animated movie to ever be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture, a feat that would only be replicated twice, and only after the nominees for Best Picture were expanded, Toy Story and Up. But it is the only traditionally animated film to ever be nominated for Best Picture, and it'll likely stay that way. I give it a 9.7 out of 10. It's one of my favorites. Disney continued to grow and innovate with their next release, 1992's Aladdin. Can I call you Al? Or how about just Dan? Or what about Lottie? Sorry, I had to do it. Aladdin continues the trend of Broadway-style presentation with beautiful animation, as well as a princess who, in the tradition of Ariel, questions authority. In this case, she both doesn't even want to be a princess because it's giving her a life that she doesn't want and can't control, and she doesn't want to adhere to the law that would force her to marry someone. Jasmine has many moments of either showing independence or working towards gaining more independence. Now, here's another thing that sets Aladdin apart. It's essentially a Disney princess movie with the gender swapped. It's a prince movie. Aladdin is the main focus of the movie, and it's almost, in a way, a buddy comedy. His relationship with the genie is the most important in the film because his relationship with Jasmine hinges on it at certain points. A lot of the plot hinges on it. While he meets Jasmine as himself without Genie, he is given a position to be suitable for Jasmine thanks to Genie. And that keeps the plot going forward. His life is saved thanks to Genie, and he stops Jafar thanks to knowing Genie. Because he knows Jafar will be a prisoner as a genie. The genie, the genie, the genie, 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 the genie, the genie, the genie, 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 the genie, the genie, genie, the genie. Speaking of Genie, not sure if we use that word enough, Robin Williams absolutely revolutionized what voiceover roles could be. He takes the role of Genie and just blows it out of the water. He actually literally blows out of the water at one point. He inserts rapid-fire humor for both adults and kids. He steals the scenes he's in, and he's able to make Genie's story one of the most emotional of the whole film. Robin Williams blazed a trail with his voice. And give an honorable mention to Gilbert Gottfried as Iago. He embraced his role as an annoying parrot and definitely foreshadowed the Aflac duck. And the themes of the movie regarding friendship, having something to offer no matter what your situation is, and being yourself are all good ones to promote to children. Now, I need to acknowledge that there was some controversy surrounding the appearance of the other characters in the film besides Aladdin and Jasmine. Those two characters have widely anglicized appearances and accents, while the rest of the characters have less appealing appearances, foreign accents, and sometimes are portrayed as greedy. In addition, the original lyrics to Arabian Nights contain the lyrics where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. Not exactly follow the bouncing ball material. Looking back at the movie, I can understand this controversy. Now, the film has a score of 94% on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $504.1 million against a budget of $28 million. I personally give the movie a 9 out of 10. Controversies aside, it's incredibly well done. Just when people were thinking, how can Disney top themselves? Two movies were in development. One movie everyone thought was going to be the big hit, so most of the animators went to work on that film. Faith in the story wasn't very strong on the other film, and everyone just had a hunch that this film that everyone wanted to work on was going to be big. Really big. Huge. The movie that everyone thought was going to be the dud of the two, 1994's The Lion King. The Lion King. This is where we hit the peak of the Disney Renaissance. Lion King was an outstanding film. It has one of the best opening sequences in any film ever, and the best in any animated film. It has a unique cast of characters who are voiced perfectly, and a protagonist who undergoes a plethora of development throughout. It has a menacing and homicidal, yet still fun villain whose sarcasm fluidity would foreshadow a good chunk of our generation, and who delivers the best Disney villain song in history. It has one of the most heartbreaking moments in Disney history when, spoiler alert, Mufasa dies. It has a lot of wisdom when it comes to remembering where you came from, learning from the past instead of denying it and trying to run from it, something a history major like myself can get behind, and a connection of all the life on Earth, and its anti-megalomania undertones because of how awful a ruler Scar becomes. It's like, don't seek power if you don't know what to do with it, or if you're not going to use it for good. And it definitely has memorable, even iconic songs. They're well constructed, they appeal to children, and they're very easy to sing along to and cross over, which is confirmed with the success of the Elton John version of Can You Feel the Love Tonight and the popularity of Hakuna Matata. And if you tell me that The Lion King isn't one of the best scored movies in the history of cinema, I will throw you off a cliff into a herd of stampeding animated wildebeests. And I've studied the most famous animated wildebeest stampede cliff homicide extensively. I can make it happen. Okay. The only way to complicate this film is its similarities to Kimba the White Lion, accidental according to Disney, and the fact that the hyenas might be able to represent an anti-immigration allegory. But the film was fantastic, and the film was an absolute smash. It received a 92% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and initially grossed $768.6 million against a $45 million budget, eventually coming to a total of $968.5 million after a 3D re-release. It was the highest grossing film of 1994, outgrossing Oscar bait Forrest Gump, a movie you might have heard of, and it became a pop culture phenomenon. The songs were being sung everywhere, and since nobody expected this much success, the merchandise was initially very short of demand. Everyone knew about it, and everyone was talking about it. It's the film that so many in my generation look back and say, oh, that was our film, or that was my film. I give it 9.5 out of 10. The film that everyone thought was going to be a smash? 1995's Pocahontas. Oops. This is where the Disney Renaissance starts to decline. Pocahontas wasn't a bad movie per se. I wouldn't call it that. It was very well animated. It has some good songs, including Colors of the Wind, which I consider to be one of the greatest Disney songs ever written. And it has a good message of harmony and tolerance while portraying the Native Americans as heroes more so than the settlers. However, the historical inaccuracies I just cannot get past. First off, her name wasn't actually Pocahontas. That was actually a nickname. Her real name was Mataoaka. To be fair, this name was hidden from the English settlers. She was around 10 or 11 when the English arrived. John Smith and Mataoaka never had a relationship. And due to two of Smith's own conflicting accounts of his captivity, it's actually likely that Mataoaka never even saved his life. Smith wasn't shot by Ratcliffe, who wasn't the first governor of the Jamestown colony. Smith was actually injured in a gunpowder accident. And global imperialism isn't something that largely should be romanticized. But there are some lines that help this movie out, such as, "Brigands, why do you think those insolent heathens attacked us? Because we invaded the land and cut down their trees and dug up their earth?" Yes, good line. And perhaps the most historically accurate line to ever be said in a Disney film or otherwise, "These white men are dangerous," which pretty much sums up most of history. But looking at the character of Pocahontas herself, she is also a great role model because of her thirst for adventure, the lengths she goes to for peace, and her loyalty. She has a strong loyalty to her people, and she stays behind to help them achieve peace and prosperity. Of course, in history, it ends much sadder than that. But I will say that this is a rare Disney movie where it's not really a happy ending, or at least conventionally. The couple doesn't end up together. They're split apart. That doesn't typically happen in Disney movies. So, in terms of analytics, Pocahontas received a 56% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $346.1 million against a $55 million budget. Thanks to redeeming qualities but incredible ignorance of history, I give it 6.9 out of 10. After Pocahontas, things steadily begin to rise for the Disney Renaissance in terms of critical reception, but fluctuate in terms of box office. This begins with 1996 Hunchback of Notre Dame. This is one of Disney's most underrated films. The voiced cast is good, the animation is stunning, the score is fantastic, and the songs are pretty good, especially the hopeful Out There and the creepily satisfying villain song Hellfire. In terms of its messages of religious hypocrisies, racial injustices, awful treatment of disability, lust, genocide, and a much more accurate portrayal of Stockholm Syndrome between Frollo and Quasimodo, this is a dark, sophisticated film. This is much more of a film for adults than for kids, and it has political undertones that are still relevant today. Frollo is such a great villain because of his likeness to greedy government officials and religious leaders throughout history. And he's also very much human, in likeness with Gaston. No magic, just power, greed, and hypocrisy. It's a very unconventional Disney animated film, and that's probably why it's not held up with The Little Mermaid and The Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and Lion King. Those movies have their fair share of dark moments, we've gone through some of them, but Hunchback has much more complex and adult themes in it. Themes that are hard for children to understand or have explained to them. And once again, it shows that you don't have to get the girl or guy to have a happy ending. Quasimodo saves Paris, and the public accepts him. When the little girl hugs him at the end, that's such a heartwarming, emotional moment. It's much better that if he just ran off with Esmeralda, right? I think so. And the fact that he accepts Esmeralda's love for Phoebus despite his love for her speaks volumes about his character. And Phoebus is a good guy, all right? He's a good guy. Oh, and that final note to send the movie off, chills, baby. Now, the character development and fun might have been lacking from previous Disney hits, which contributed to its lack of success comparatively. But I still find it to be a splendid film that you need to watch if you call yourself a Disney fan, or if you claim that all Disney movies are the same, because they're not. Hunchback received a 73% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $325.3 million against a $100 million budget, the most expensive Disney animated film ever to be made to that date. I give it 8.8 out of 10. See this film. After Hunchback, we were treated to 1997's Hercules. Honey, you mean Huncules! I had to do that. That might have been bad. Hercules is another departure from previous entries, considering its source material being Greek mythology, which did have inaccuracies because they had to adapt it for kids, and its animation style being much more artistic than realistic. The character development is good, the songs were great, unique, and very memorable, with Go the Distance being the highlight, and songs such as Zero to Hero and I Won't Say I'm in Love still being able to hold a candle. Get it? Okay. Now, a clear highlight of this film is James Woods' portrayal of Hades. Instead of this dark, brooding god of the underworld that you could expect, Hades is a wisecracking, fast-talking, used car salesman of a god who finds humor in the death that surrounds him daily, forever. James Woods nails this role and becomes a villain you don't want to leave the screen, and yet you're satisfied when he's flushed down the underworld like a toilet. And I definitely see Hercules as a message against gender stereotypes, and here's why. We have Meg, who is supposed to be the damsel in distress, but she has a strong, sarcastic personality, and she refuses to be a victim. And she saves Hercules at one point in the movie. She saves him, he saves her. It's a trade-off. She doesn't fall for Herc's Wonder Boy, big, strong man aspect. She falls for him once she knows his human side instead of his God side. When it comes to Herc himself, he's this huge, strong figure of manhood. Ooh, yeah! That was Macho Man if you didn't understand. But he's not a hero because of it, which I felt was the movie saying that this doesn't make him a man. It was his character, the strength of his heart that judged him. This movie emphasizes character. Judge people on their character and not their bodies or their fame. It's a great message. The film holds an 83% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $252.7 million against an $85 million budget. An underperformance compared to Hunchback, but still great. I personally give it a 9 out of 10. This is one of the films that I watched to death growing up. It was one of my films. Speaking of knocking down gender stereotypes, 1998's Mulan was the next film in the Disney Renaissance. This film also favors artistic style over realism, which makes for some pretty good animation, very good. There's some good characterization, and Eddie Murphy continues Robin Williams' legacy of quick-witted supporting characters voiced by comedians as Mushu. Mushu was definitely something to help draw the kids in, but Eddie Murphy is well known to adults as well, and knows how to appeal to them. So he's essentially a 2-for-1 situation, like Genie, like Robin Williams, only I prefer Robin Williams. The music is great all around, especially the musical numbers. Reflection is a beautiful song, and one that a lot of people can connect to. I've read the song as having strong LGBT allegories. And of course, there's I'll Make a Man Out of You. Now, whenever guys sing a Disney song, they typically pick this one. And let me tell you why that's interesting. Within the context of the film, the song is basically musical irony. Everything mentioned in the song is supposedly representative of a man, or how a man is supposed to be. It's a mold men are supposed to fit into. And yet, here's a woman being able to do all of this. So clearly that's wrong. That doesn't make a man, that just makes a person that can do all of those things. This is something that I've always found brilliant because while reinforcing gender stereotypes with the lyrics of the song, it's breaking them down at the same time. And that's the main message of the movie. Gender stereotypes suck. Now, a woman can do what a man can do, and vice versa. And I can get behind that. There's also messages of honor, courage, and family, but the message I've always seen is breaking down ideas about gender. Not to mention Shang Yu makes a scary good villain. Criticism-wise, there were only 4 songs within the narrative of the movie, and I think maybe they could have had a couple more songs, or just none at all to help the narrative out. Also, the film does differ pretty heavily from the Chinese legend. Mulan holds an 86% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $304.3 million against a $90 million budget. I give it an 8.6 out of 10. I'll essentially agree with the consensus on this one. And now we reach the end of the Disney Renaissance with 1999's Tarzan. Tarzan has some striking and gorgeous animation that goes for more realism this time around. CG animation had seen a boost thanks to Pixar, and Disney had been using it throughout the Disney Renaissance in pockets. Tarzan utilizes it more often than other films, and the film does it splendidly. It flows perfectly with the hand-drawn animation, and it creates wonderful scenery. As usual, the voice work was great, and the music I thought was pretty good. I thought it was great. It was really well done, and it was presented uniquely. Every other Disney Renaissance film besides Rescuers Down Under has had its music presented by the characters in the story, mostly, to further the story along, but in Tarzan's case, it's mostly Phil Collins, with the exception of the brief lullaby from Glenn Close and You'll Be in My Heart, and Trash in the Camp, which was a great sequence, by the way. I mean, who doesn't love a good scat song? I enjoyed the songs, and I think they advanced the plot well. I think their sound fits in with the theme as well. And I think Son of Man is a very underrated song. In terms of theme, it definitely has adoption parallels and a message of acceptance because we may not all be exactly the same, but we're really not that different either. It's not having to be blood to be family, and I find that to be very true. There's a strong anti-poaching message as well, both of animals and of nature itself. And once again, it does touch on what it means to be a man. Clayton, a reputable human villain, is trying to domesticate Tarzan to his way of thought and his way of living, but Tarzan was perfectly fine the way he was. Right before Clayton falls to his horrific, graphic, oh my god, how did they get away with that in a G-rated movie death, Tarzan absolutely rebukes Clayton when he tells Tarzan to shoot him and be a man. Not a man like you! You know, that's what he says. Once again, it's a case of Disney movie ripping apart, shredding to bits, hanging from a vine. Oh my god, I still can't believe that's in a G-rated movie. I have to stop thinking about that right now. The phrase, be a man. So Tarzan holds an 88% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $448.2 million against a $130 million budget. I give it 9 out of 10. So after Tarzan, things began to slow down with Walt Disney Animation Studios. Fantasia 2000, Dinosaur, The Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis the Lost Empire, Lilo and Stitch, Treasure Planet, and Brother Bear came out in that order following Tarzan. Don't get me wrong, all of those are great films in their own way, some more than others. Emperor's New Groove is hilarious, Atlantis and Treasure Planet are very underrated, especially the latter, and Lilo and Stitch was pretty successful, and it was pretty real at times. But these films didn't match the success or the acclaim or the staying power of the Renaissance films, maybe except for Lilo and Stitch. There's a number of factors here. The ideas were more unique and less by the book. Visual prowess was overshadowing plot in some cases. And a huge factor was the rise of Pixar and computer animation. It was a double-edged sword for Disney here. The same year Pocahontas slowed things down for the Renaissance, Toy Story 1 debuted. And Pixar was putting out movies that not only looked good in their utilization of computer imagery, but were just so masterfully told that they were overtaking everything traditional animation was offering. The release of CG movies from other studios like Shrek and Ice Age only helped push the public away from traditional animation more. And Disney hit their new low with 2004's Home on the Range. The uninteresting plot and uneven plot, unmemorable characters, lesser visual quality, and lack of any kind of splendor really did this movie in. It has a 54% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and only grossed $100.3 million against a $110 million budget, so it lost money. Honestly, the only thing you should see in this movie is Randy Quaid's villain song. It's very unexpected, and it's actually pretty entertaining. So Michael Eisner decides, pencil bad, mouse good, and Walt Disney Animation Studios shifts to computer animation. Oh, by the way, Michael Eisner created a company meant to churn out cash grab sequels to Pixar movies that they had the rights to, called Circle 7 Animation, but he was ousted as CEO before that could happen. Whew, thank every religious being available that didn't happen. Anywho, 2005 saw the release of Chicken Little, which was the first computer-generated animated film of Walt Disney Animation Studios, and it was not very good. It had a 36% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and was not Disney quality, nor Pixar. It just wasn't worthy of sharing such lineage. Now in 2006, Disney purchased Pixar, and Pixar's leadership took control of Walt Disney Animation. John Lasseter became the chief creative officer, and things began to turn. The next release, 2007's Meet the Robinsons, was a great movie, but it wasn't the most successful in terms of box office and critics. It was more like a taste of things to come. Similar to another film I mentioned earlier, and its name rhymes with the late Blouse Protective. Now, if Meet the Robinsons was a taste of things to come, 2008's Bolt was the actual appetizer, because you eat it instead of taste it. Bolt had a familiar story, kind of like Buzz Lightyear in the first Toy Story mixed with Homeward Bound, but it was well done. It was done so well. The characters were great, the near perfect animation, voice work, especially Chris Sanders as Rhino, and a well-paced and well-told plot, and a great balance of humor and emotion. I didn't find the animation to be excellent, but it was still good nonetheless. Bolt was a nice success, and Pixar's influence, or rather Lasseter's, was beginning to shine through. And this led to the first movie in what is considered to be the Disney revival period, or Neo-Renaissance, whichever you prefer, The Princess and the Frog. We've tasted, we've had appetizers, now we're at the main course. Yay, food. Once again, it's a return to form for Disney, just like another film whose title rhymes with brittle blurpade. Traditional animation, a princess movie, a true musical, stuff about stars. Princess and the Frog brought these themes back, and aspects that had made the studio such a standard bearer in the past. But once again, it steps forward too. The idea on wishing on stars is challenged. or more appropriately expanded upon, saying that wishing on stars gives you hope and the will to make your dream come true, but your work must be put into it for the dream to actually come true. If you watch Pinocchio, the movie that When You Wish Upon a Star was coined, the movie is actually telling you that if you watch the whole thing, because Geppetto's wish only half comes true, and the rest is up to him in Pinocchio. But Princess and the Frog is much more explicit about it. It explains it a lot more. Now, the music was awesome. The songs were fun and unique. They advanced the plot perfectly, and they're a wonderful tribute to New Orleans jazz. The characters are all great. They have their own quirks, flaws, and desires. And only Disney would get someone to cry about the death of a firefly. Wait, spoiler alert! Well, you know what? If you're watching this and you're this far in, you've probably already seen it. I really hope. If you haven't, then this never happened. You're in a dream. Ray survives. Forget it. Moving on. This return to traditional animation was risky, but it was just so wonderfully done. Honestly, I cannot see this movie as a CG animated movie. It just wouldn't work. The traditional animation also keeps the nostalgic tribute to New Orleans jazz and the Roaring '20s going. Now let's examine the new princess in Tiana. I love Tiana's character, and I love how her story goes. She's African American, she's a woman, she lives in the South in the '20s. And she works her bum off to make her dream come true of opening a restaurant, a small business, and it's successful. She breaks down sexism and racism in the '20s. Tiana's a wonderful role model. Plus, her relationship with Naveen is great because instead of some stories where the hard-working woman says, forget all of this nonsense to her job to be with her man, she still pursues her dream, and Naveen kind of tags along. He teaches her to have a little more fun, but she teaches him about responsibility and work. It's a good message of balance. You need to work for what you want, but don't take life too seriously. Louis comes with the message of just be yourself. And Ray comes with the message of love finds a way. Great optimism. Now there was some criticism when it came to voodoo and its treatment of more of a magic than a religion in the movie, and the fact that Tiana, the first African-American Disney princess, spends most of the movie as a frog. And I do understand that. But at least subsequently, Tiana has been marketed as herself. The movie was beautiful, the animation was beautiful, wonderful songs, great messages, awesome characters. It's totally Disney returning to form and stepping forward. It has an 84% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it grossed $267 million against a $105 million budget. I give it a 9.1 out of 10. It had valid criticism, but it was a wonderful, wonderful movie. Now, it only grossed $267 million. That's successful, but it's not the blockbuster Disney was hoping for. There are a number of possible reasons for this. One huge reason that was cited by Disney themselves was the word princess in the title. Disney's marketing department actually warned Disney Animation that the title may lead to the public thinking that it was for girls only. But Disney Animation was persistent that the movie was strong enough that the title wouldn't matter. And then add another factor that it came out 5 days before Avatar smashed theaters to death, and the mindset that computer animation is what's in now, and you have less tickets sold. And I do believe that there are racist parents out there who wouldn't take their kids to see it. So there's that too. The main thing to take away here is the marketing, because that would lead to the title of the next film in the Disney revival period, 2010's Tangled. Originally titled Rapunzel because that's the story, Disney changed it to Tangled to market it gender neutral. Disney claimed that the title change was also due to the fact that the movie is actually both Rapunzel and Flynn Rider / Eugene Fitzherbert's movie because of the increased focus on both of them. I do agree that it is both their movies, but come on, let's be real. They changed it for marketing. But I don't care because the movie was great. This movie had all of the ingredients to be a Disney Renaissance film, just computer animated. Fun and well-rounded characters? Check. Excellent voice work? Check. Beautiful animation? Check. Incredible sense of wonder? Check. Glorious balance of humor and heart? Check. Sprinkled with good messages? Check. Memorable songs and score? Check. It's got all the makings of a film that would have been released during the Disney Renaissance. Let's examine some of the messages it leaves with us. One is definitely love not being about smothering or limiting, as evident by the relationship between Mother Gothel and Rapunzel. Oh, by the way, that's some Stockholm Syndrome right there. But anyway, we also have a message of everyone being connected by having a dream. and about not judging a book by its cover when it comes to the thug and ruffian characters. And one of the best the movie deals with is the movie extending past Rapunzel's dream coming true. She asks the question that, dare I say, no Disney movie asks: what do I do when this dream comes true? Her dream, of course, being seeing the floating lanterns. And when Hugh Flynn answers with, well, that's the good part, I guess. You get to go find a new dream. That's great optimism right there. The movie dares its viewers to not stop dreaming. Now, criticism I will give. The songs were great and the score was awesome, especially Kingdom Dance, which is a score song that plays as Rapunzel and Flynn Jean dance in the kingdom. However, as much as I enjoy the songs, I understand that they don't really hold up compared to the other Disney songs. For one thing, there aren't a lot of them. If you don't count the Healing Incantation, there are 6 songs, and 2 of them were shorter reprises, or reprises, however you pronounce it. They just weren't as memorable as the Disney Renaissance counterparts. And this is coming from somebody who loved the songs. Now, Tangled holds an 89% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it grossed $591.8 million against a $260 million budget, which still stands as the most expensive animated film ever made. I give it 9 out of 10. After Tangled, Disney took it back a bit and put out its last, for now, traditionally animated film, 2011's Winnie the Pooh. It served as Walt Disney Animation's 4th sequel, and an absolute charmer. If you grew up with, or even kind of with Winnie the Pooh, you'll love this movie. It's basically everything you'd expect from a Pooh tale. Charming, silly, heartwarming, musical, nostalgic, and whimsical. It was all of those things. It's absolutely a family film. If Winnie the Pooh had never had any kind of adaptation before this movie, it would just be a kid's film. But the fact that it has such a long, enduring legacy, that parents and grandparents are now taking their children and grandchildren to see these characters that they themselves saw as children, makes it purely a family film and a touching thing to think about. And like I said, this wasn't supposed to be a blockbuster or a game changer. It was just a step back, a wonderful step back in this new era of revival, similar to another movie whose title rhymes with Best Skewer's Clown Blunder. The only problem with this step back, I found it way too short. And I'm not alone. It was barely an hour. There could have been much more. Don't deny us more Pooh when everything's changing to computers. That sounded weird. Winnie the Pooh. Don't deny us more Winnie the Pooh. Okay, so Winnie the Pooh holds a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed a modest $50.1 million against a $30 million budget. I give it 8.7 out of 10. See it if you love Pooh. Winnie the Pooh. Oops. So after this light offering, Disney comes back with a punch, and they bring a giant fist to do it. 2012's Wreck-It Ralph. So when I first heard about Wreck-It Ralph, I was interested by the video game aspect, but I thought it looked a little gimmicky, if you will, for Disney. Like I thought another studio should be handling a video game parody movie. However, once I saw it, it felt very Disney-like to me. In typical Disney fashion, they add a little sense of magic and wonder to it, and they add emotion. What could have been just an excuse to parody old video games and rake in some nostalgia money becomes a coherent movie with unique narrative, likable characters, extraordinary visuals, and lots of heart. There's emotion in it. This movie might make you cry. In terms of the message of the movie, I've always looked at this movie as a message against looking down at someone based on their occupation. Ralph plays the bad guy in his video game, but he wants to be a good guy and he wants to be respected. Through the events of the movie, he finds out he's actually a good guy whose job is to play a bad guy. It doesn't mean he's actually bad, it's just his job. And without him, his game Fix-It Felix Jr. would not even exist, which is something the other characters soon realize. They find a new respect for Ralph because they also realize he's a good guy and they value him by the end of the movie. It's kind of like Rudolph, you know, the red-nosed reindeer, except the other characters, it's not like where it's, oh look, this thing about you that we made fun of you for can come in handy sometimes. It's more like, oh, this guy's actually a good guy and he's just as important as we are. We're jerks, aren't we? Wreck-It Ralph is very much an everyone contributes kind of movie. And a shout out to Alan Tudyk channeling his Ed Wynn with this King Candy character voice. Ed Wynn voiced the Mad Hatter and Uncle Albert and Mary Poppins if you don't know who it is. Okay. Now, Wreck-It Ralph has an 86% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $471.2 million against a $165 million budget. I give it 8.5 out of 10. Things are rising. And now you're either going to love this part or hate this part. But I implore you to not give me the cold shoulder as we ice pick into this next film, 2013's Frozen. Let me say that when I first saw the movie, it was before it rolled into the giant snowball that it is today. So while I will absolutely be acknowledging the success, I will be rating it mostly based on how I felt after I saw it the first time before it became this behemoth. So, allow me to break the ice. You're welcome, Roger. I love the movie. There you go. I loved it, so sue me. I found it to be very well animated, minus a couple of mistakes, I know, excellently voiced, and splendidly scored, with an engaging plot, mountains of heart, and a great balance of humor and emotion that Disney is so great at. And the songs, I thought, were excellent. All of them had a different feel to them, which gave some variety to keep things interesting. That can have the opposite effect, that much is very true, but I found it to work in this case. All of them were important in advancing the plot. Maybe excluding reindeers are better than people, but it does let us know that Kristoff has people issues due to being best friends with a reindeer for so long and raised by trolls, which kind of plays on the kidnapping of children part of trolls that was in Nordic mythology. But let's move past that. Don't think that Frozen Heart or Fixer Upper belong in this conversation. Frozen Heart sets up the movie by warning of the dangers of ice, the ice that humans create, not water, figurative ice. And Fixer Upper both foreshadows the end and sends one of the movie's many messages. Everyone gets mad, scared, and stressed, so show people love to help get them back to their best. Oh, that rhymed. Look at me. In addition to that, we have Anna choosing to sacrifice herself to save her sister instead of kissing the man, which reminds children that love doesn't just come from a significant other. Plus, we have Disney getting a little self-aware with its "you can't marry a man you just met" approach to love, which was pretty cool. And we have Anna never giving up her love for Elsa, reminding children not to stop loving people who are troubled. Frozen utilizes the Disney formula while shaking it up at the same time, having Elsa simply be someone who was troubled, not a villain or a bad person, and having the Prince Charming character be the true villain, and quite a cold one, which at this point is absolutely pun intended. The reveal of Hans's true intentions was great, and the inclusion of little hints within the movie, including "Love is an Open Door," listen to that song again, "It's Sung in a Different Way" by Hans, was good and sneaky. And I will say this, Olaf is actually deeper than just a comedic sidekick. Not only does he give wisdom regarding love, but his comical desire to know summer and heat actually makes him a manifestation of Elsa's desire to control her powers, or lose them, and have a life of warmth. Elsa created him with her magic, so he's an extension of her, which gives the sense of, it makes sense to his summer desires. Now, the criticism? This is still a rather formulaic, even if it does mess with the formula, movie. And sometimes things felt a little too explained, and the pacing at the beginning was a little quick. Also, Kristoff could have used some more singing, but that's all I can really give. Frozen has an 89% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $1.276 billion, with a B, against a $150 million budget, making it the highest grossing animated film of all time. I give it 9.1 out of 10. Now here's the kicker. And for some, it may be a kick to the gut to hear me say this, but it's absolutely true. Frozen is the new Lion King. It is. It absolutely is. Now, I'm not talking quality or content-wise. That's not what I mean. I'm talking in terms of success, popularity, and even origin. Nobody in Disney thought that Frozen was going to be the smash that it was. Sound familiar? Disney fell very short of merchandise demand because they didn't expect the success. Sound familiar? Frozen songs crossed over into the mainstream and became pop culture staples. Sound familiar? Frozen was the highest grossing film, period, of the year it was released. Sound familiar? Frozen has held the title of the highest grossing animated film of all time. Sound familiar? Frozen's success is almost exactly parallel to that of The Lion King. It connected with children in such a way that they wanted it to be popular. They wanted to see it everywhere. When kids today look back, they get to be my age and they look back, they're going to say, oh yeah, Frozen was my generation's movie. Just like I look back and say that Lion King was my generation's movie. Other Renaissance movies made their presence known in pop culture, but everyone knows that The Lion King was the most popular and the one that transcended. And Frozen was the movie to do that for the Disney revival. Now remember, with Lion King, Pocahontas came out afterwards and represented a dip for the Renaissance. Was that going to happen with Frozen? Ha 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 ha, nope! We got Big Hero 6, Walt Disney Animation's first utilization of the Marvel acquisition. What it gives us is not just another superhero movie at a time of super exposure. It takes the action-packed superhero formula and adds that amazing blend of humor and emotion that Disney is so good at producing. And Baymax is the one who really does it. He's just as funny as he is comforting. He provides as many laughs as he does tears. The main focus of the movie is Hero's connection to Baymax and Baymax's connection to Tadashi. Baymax is almost like Tadashi's spirit, because when Tadashi died, spoiler alert, oh my god, I'm not good at that. Sorry. Anywho, when Tadashi died, Baymax, his creation, the extension of his passion and his legacy, looks after Hero, like an angel. Baymax helps Hero grieve and recover while also serving as one of Hero's last connections to Tadashi. This leads us to a message against vengeance. Hero is grieving over Tadashi and seeks revenge. Professor Callahan is grieving over his daughter, which he really should have mentioned when talking to Hero about Alistair Cray, and seeks revenge. With Baymax's help and an assurance that it's up to Hero to continue Tadashi's passion for helping people and making the world a better place, Hero realizes that vengeance only leads to disaster and more vengeance, and since it was Callahan's vengeance that led to Hero's vengeance. I said that word a lot. But it's true, and it makes for a truly exciting and touching film. Plus, the animation is beautiful and creative, the characters are very much likable, and the score is great. It's well paced, and it has exhilarating action sequences that keep the superhero feel. My criticism would be that the beginning's expositional dialogue is a little forced, a little bit, even if it is necessary. And even though Fred was a funny character, he could have been a little funnier. And I already mentioned Callahan leaving out the fact that Cray trapped his daughter in a portal when he was warning Hero about Cray's ways, even though it sets up the reveal of Callahan well. Spoiler. Big Hero 6 has an 89% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $657.8 million against a $165 million budget. I give it 9 out of 10. So we're still going strong. The Disney revival didn't have that dip right after the peak like the Renaissance did. Would the dip come after the follow-up to the biggest film of the revival? Ha 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 ha, nope. We got Zootopia. And this figurative mountain range gets way higher. This figurative buffet of food that I talked about earlier is just getting more and more and more tasty. Zootopia is unlike anything we were given in the Renaissance or the revival. No Walt Disney animated classic has been this overtly political. And this film both takes place in and reflects modern times. We have messages of casual and institutional racism and racial profiling, casual and institutional sexism, social activism, politics and corrupt government, fear-mongering, xenophobia, even the war on drugs. And the film came out during one of the most poisonous election seasons in history, where fear-mongering, racism, xenophobia, all of these things that the movie was fighting against were in the driver's seat. And due to the results of this said poisonous election, this movie remains very important. Zootopia manages to cram all of these complex themes into a movie that both children and adults can enjoy and connect to. It has wonderful animation, a great score by Michael Giacchino, and an optimistic theme song from Shakira. It has jokes for all ages, including multiple pop culture references and self-referential Disney references. I got it out. A splendid mix between the age-old animation trope of personified animals and modern America, as well and well-established lead and supporting characters. Judy Hopps, in particular, is a strong female protagonist whose desire is occupation-based, similar to Tiana, only Judy is not a princess and has no love interest. She wants to be a police officer, serve the city, and change things within the system. She's a positive role model because she's not perfect, but she's absolutely determined, she's independent, and she has a fighting spirit. Zootopia It's charming, incredibly clever, and incredibly topical. It has a 98% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, tied with Snow White and 101 Dalmatians for the second highest approval rating of the Walt Disney Animated Classics, behind Pinocchio's 100%. And it's currently, overall, the best reviewed film of the year. And it has currently grossed $1.024 billion against a $150 million budget. I give it 9.5 out of 10. And now we've covered both the Disney Renaissance and the Disney Revival. And I hope you picked up on the similarities. Disney seemed to repeat its own history with the Disney Revival. They had movies to indicate that better things were to come. They had returns to form and steps forward in the form of princess movies to set the periods in motion. They had a step back early on. They had a smash, an absolute smash that dominated pop culture. They had different feels to the movies with different messages. Some were similar. And they returned to their animation domination glory, reminding the public who the rulers really are in the animation game and who built this house. But there's one thing that's missing: the dip, the drop, the avalanche, the slip and slide, the parachuteless skydive, the high wire mishap, the trampoline tooth knocker, the 5-story plunge into the briar patch, the 13-story drop into the fifth dimension. The Disney Renaissance had it, but not the Revival. In fact, the Revival has only gotten better. 2 movies have gone by since the, I'll say, current peak of the Revival, which was Frozen, and neither of them were disappointments like Pocahontas was, comparative disappointments, which came out right after the peak of the Renaissance and Lion King. So which period stands above the other? Believe it or not, the Disney Revival has outperformed the Renaissance. The Renaissance earned $3,832,900,000 and averaged $383,290,000 per movie out of 10 movies. And the Revival has earned $4,337,900,000 and has averaged $619,700,000 per movie out of 7 movies. Some of the numbers in the Renaissance aren't adjusted for possible inflation, but even if they were, it wouldn't be that much more. It could propel it over the Revival, but still, it has 3 more movies than the Revival. The Revival only has 7 movies so far. In addition, in terms of approval rating, the Disney Renaissance has an average of 82.5% approval rating out of 10 movies, while the Revival has an average of 89.3% out of 7 movies. So it is kind of early to run these numbers against each other because there haven't been enough movies in the Revival yet. But if you want my opinion, as of right now, I will place the Disney Renaissance above the Disney Revival, but not by much. The main factor is there would not be a Revival without the Renaissance, because there wouldn't be anything to influence it. However, depending on if and when the Revival ends, or is given a stopping point, later on, I think I could end up changing my mind. Disney has repeated their own history with the Disney Revival on so many levels except for that dip. As long as they avoid that dip, the Revival will outshine the Renaissance. Plus, the dip happened in the middle of the Renaissance. If a dip happens for the Revival, maybe that'll be halfway too, and we'll have a larger library in the Revival than the Renaissance. We'll just have to wait and see. Well, that's it for me. Thank you all for your time, and thank you to Mason Cable Network for allowing me to take over this glorious program for a day. I think I've made the most of it. Thank you for hanging in there with me if you've made it this far. So have a magical day, good night, and Godspeed. That's for you, Roger. And look for me next year in Disney World.